Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar on leveraging ISO 27001 for Europrivacy certification. I'm Alan Calder, I'm your host for this afternoon. I'm the founder and chief executive of IT Governance, which is a single source supplier of everything you could conceivably need for tackling IT governance, cyber risk management and compliance. I've been in and around this world for about 20 years, written a number of books around ISO 27001 and GDPR, and so have way more depth of knowledge than I feel I ought to have at my current young age. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Sebastian Ziegler. Dr. Ziegler is president of the Europrivacy International Board of Experts. He's got a whole bunch of qualifications which you can read around on this slide, all of which indicates that where GDPR and the systems and processes that sit behind Europrivacy are concerned, he is the person who knows most, who's had most to do with the development and evolution of the standard and its forward growth. And I'm going to hand over to him shortly for him to talk to you about Europrivacy as a standard. You will all have noticed that you're on mute when you joined the webinar. That's because we like to try and kill off background noise, but we hope that you will have a series of questions as we go through the webinar, and in your GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the screen in front of you, there is a questions line. So if you click on questions, you can type questions into that. And if you type your questions in as we go through the webinar, what we'll do when we get to the end of the webinar is we'll share the question with the audience, and either Dr. Ziegler or I will answer that as best as we can. In all, the webinar is probably about 40 minutes or so to cover the prepared information, then maybe 10-15 minutes worth of questions, just depending on how long we can keep going and how long you have questions that are worth your while posing for us. So that's the plan for this afternoon. And before we get into the main part of the session, just of course a little bit about IT governance for those of you to whom we are new. We've been in business around privacy and GDPR and cybersecurity, GDPR of course newer, for about 20 years. We have about 180 employees, more than 12,000 clients across 5 continents, and a comprehensive GDPR set of products and services built on deep expertise in our consultants, trainers, and subject matter experts. We've delivered 1,000 or more GDPR projects. We've helped 15 or 20,000 delegates through training courses towards internationally accredited qualifications. We have a lot of Cyber Essentials certifications, and we have well over 2,000 different clients using our governance, risk, and compliance software. And of course, most importantly, we are an official Europrivacy partner. We're an official partner and have been for some time on a consultancy basis to provide services around the globe, because that's where we operate as an organization around the globe. Clients think we're quite good at what we do. We have our Net Promoter Score 63, which is just a fraction short of world class. Our Trustpilot scores for everything people buy through our websites sitting up at excellence. So we are well known for not just knowledge and expertise, but for quality of service. And I hope that for those of you who haven't experienced it, you will, following this webinar, take the opportunity to do so. So the agenda for today is an introduction to Europrivacy, for which I'm going to hand you to Dr. Ziegler, and then we're going to look at some of the specific Europrivacy certification requirements, how those map to 27001, and how, if you already have 27001, they can help your journey to Europrivacy certification. And we're going to look at the Cyber Comply platform and how that can help with Europrivacy certification. So on that note, I hand you to Dr. Ziegler.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to join you and to share some insight on the European Data Protection Seal and Europrivacy. So allow me to start by a few introductions regarding the genesis. Let me see if I can control. Okay, now it works. Some latency. So yes, first of all, so the European Data Protection Seal, Europrivacy, has been researched and developed through the European Research Program. So it's a long journey which started before the GDPR more than 11 years ago with a former um, uh, directive, and which has followed the adoption and implementation of the GDPR. It was approved in 2022 by the European Data Protection Board to serve as European Data Protection Seal under Article 42 GDPR. So it's the only set of officially recognized criteria that are formally recognized by all EU and European Economic Area jurisdictions. And that is quite a great recognition. We are very happy with that, but at the same time, it's a very important responsibility to make it right and to ensure that criteria will be adequately used to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. So as you all know, the GDPR makes over 70 references to certification. It's a very important instrument in the context of the GDPR. You can refer to certification in your relationship between controller and processors, for instance, to assess the adequacy of the measure in place, set in place by data processors. You can use it as a mechanism for international data transfer under Article 46. You can use it also to assess your own compliance, also to support data protection by design and by default. So it's a very important tool, which is transversal to the GDPR. Okay. The scheme is managed by an international board of experts, about 30 experts in data protection from different countries, so academics, but also practitioners, experts also in certification in cybersecurity, but mainly experts in data protection who are monitoring and overviewing the scheme. So the role of this board of experts is to ensure that whenever there is a change in the legal environment, legal framework, new regulations, such as the upcoming regulations from the European Union, or there is a jurisprudence at the European level, that we address these evolving legal requirements to ensure that the criteria are always aligned with the legal obligations. So one of the characteristics, again, of GDPR, and I would say European Data Protection Seal, is that it's not about assessing the compliance per se with a set of criteria. It's using the criteria to assess the compliance with the legal obligation. So it's a kind of work of translation, translating legal obligations into auditable criteria with factual evidences to demonstrate compliance with the requirements. The scheme is managed by the European Center for Certification and Privacy in Luxembourg, and it is made available to an ecosystem of qualified partners. So we made free license, we deliver free license to qualified partners who are willing to use the scheme. But there is a very strict selection process to ensure that only organizations with a strong track record, with the capacity and capabilities to deliver high quality services will use the scheme for delivering public or commercial services. And this ecosystem of partners is bringing together major law firms, consulting firms, certification bodies, and solution providers. Some of the value proposition of certification. Why is it relevant and useful to take advantage or to use a European Data Protection Seal or a GDPR certification? The first one is to identify and reduce your legal and financial risk, and that's something very important. We often consider that we are complying with the regulation. We think we are complying, but it's always interesting to have a mechanism to systematically assess the level of compliance. And the good news that with Europrivacy, we have criteria which have been reviewed and approved by EDPB, which means by the entirety of the EU and EEA data protection authorities. Then, of course, it enables to check and demonstrate GDPR compliance. It's not only important to reduce your risk, but also to be able to demonstrate, to communicate your compliance, in particular to the data subjects, to third parties and other entities. Let me see, there's some delay. Okay, of course, it's a way also to improve reputation and access to market. To build trust and confidence, we stress the use of these two words because we realize the question of compliance with the GDPR is not only issue of building trust with third parties, but it's also a very important issue for DPOs, compliance officer, but for other stakeholders in a company or a public administration, including the board of director, if it's a company, the shareholders, to ensure that as a shareholder, you're investing in a company which is doing the things right, which is not exposing the investors to legal and financial risk in case they will not comply with the regulation. There's also a way, so for the DPO, if you have a large group, to also distribute the validation of the compliance, because if you are the head of a DPO compliance office and you have different branches, it's also quite stressful and difficult to control and monitor what's happening in the different branches. So again, it provides a very clear and well-structured tool to document, to assess, document, and validate the level of compliance. It's another characteristic of Europrivacy. It has been designed since day one to be easily extendable to non-EU jurisdictions. So we already have extensions, for instance, to address complementary UK obligations or complementary Swiss obligations. And we are working on about, I would say, currently more than 10 non-EU jurisdictions, to ensure that if someone wants to use the certification to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR, it can use the same certification with a few additional criteria to assess the compliance with the UK GDPR or the Swiss Federal Act on Data Protection, without having to replicate the same effort in Switzerland or in UK or in other jurisdictions. So we're working really on this model of extensibility to address, to simplify again the life of those interested to demonstrate compliance. It's of course also a competitive advantage. To give an example, if you are a data processor or if you have a data controller, when you choose a data processor under Article 28 GDPR, you are still responsible and liable for what the processor will do with the data you share with them. I mean, you have to do some homework to assess if it's a reliable and trustable processor, but you still remain liable in case the processor is not behaving correctly, or let's imagine the processor just had to face a data breach. As a data controller, you still keep a responsibility and liability for this. And the certification is one very efficient mechanism, to reduce this surface of risk if you are a controller. And then for a data processor, it becomes a very important competitive advantage, because then you can offer something very interesting to your clients by providing them a reduced surface of risk in terms of legal and financial risk with compliance. Another important element, I will come back to this a little bit later, that we really see the certification as a way, on one hand, to reduce risk, but more importantly, to recognize the work of the DPO, compliance officer. It's really a way to turn what is usually perceived as a center of cost. Most board of directors in companies will allocate some budget to the DPO, to the compliance officer, but they will try to limit it, because in their mind, from their perspective, it is perceived as a center of cost. We have to deliver, to allocate some resources, but we'll try to minimize it because there is no return on investment. While the certification transforms what DPOs and compliance officers have invested in terms of time, effort to ensure compliance with the regulation, into an intangible asset, into something that can be used by, for instance, the sales and marketing teams, that can be used by the B2B relationship, that can be used to be more attractive and to build trust with the market, but also to build trust with the financial analysts, to demonstrate that your company is proactively engaged in ensuring full compliance with the regulation. And these elements can contribute to create value for the company, economic and financial value, in terms of financial valuation for the company. And that's something very important, because it's a way to transform, again, what is perceived as a cost into an opportunity to invest for the value creation of the company. And it means that for the DPO, and that's what we hope, that for a smart board of directors, they will see the opportunity to then proactively support the DPO and compliance office to really invest in compliance, not as a cost, but as an opportunity to build value for the company. And that's something which we hope will be a game changer for many DPOs. Another element which is very important, it is also a mechanism which has been designed in the GDPR to support cross-border and processor data transfer. As I mentioned already for Article 28, you can use the certification to reduce your risk if you're a controller by using processor which are certified. But if you are a processor, you can use it also to facilitate the transfer from a controller to you by reducing the level of uncertainty and the risk for the controllers. It is also clearly mentioned under Article 46 of the GDPR as a mechanism for international data transfer. So currently, when the first set of criteria were approved by EDPB, the EDPB didn't finalize its guidelines for international transfer with certification, which were approved in February. And we have currently an extension of Europrivacy that is under review by EDPB, and if approved by EDPB, will enable to use the same certification for Article 42 certification and Article 46 GDPR certification for international data transfer. So things should evolve, are expected to evolve very soon. Then another element, another characteristics of the scheme is the fact that the scheme is continuously monitored, which means that if certified data processing, an applicant who has a certified data processing is facing a regulatory evolution, a regulatory change. Let's imagine there's a new jurisprudence at European level, a new EU regulation that would impact the obligation or the definition of the scope of the GDPR. Then we will automatically update, monitor, and update if required, the criteria and the requirement, and then we will inform all the users of the community. So it's a way also to have a kind of regular update in case of regulatory change. And then if there is any change, the certified entity will need to address its regulatory obligations and then to adapt and demonstrate compliance by the next audit review. And then finally, it is the only set of officially recognized, legally recognized criteria to assess GDPR compliance across all EU, EA jurisdictions and recognized by all EU and EA jurisdictions as valid and adequate. So fundamentally, let me, just moving too fast now, it's really about reducing risk on one hand, about documenting the compliance, so to ensure that you have a well-structured documentation of your compliance with the GDPR, and then valuing compliance. And that's very important. We really see it as a continuum, and I will come back to this in a few minutes. So what does an applicant need to be certified? Fundamentally, it's to comply with the regulation. What the criteria are doing is fundamentally assessing through auditable criteria the compliance with the legal obligations. So if you comply with the law, if you've done what you are expected to do to fully comply with the law, then you're ready to start the certification. But if you do not comply with the law, you should first ensure compliance with the law and then consider a certification. So it's really, the first element is to comply with the regulation. Then you need to have a DPO or the equivalent of a DPO. It can be an external service, but you need to have someone in charge of compliance with the regulation. And you need to have a record of data processing activities. In other words, even if it's not always required by the GDPR, in particular for SMEs, we consider it would not be reasonable to deliver a certification to an entity which doesn't have someone in charge of compliance and which would not know what are its personal data processed by the organization. So these are two elements which are required. So to comply with the law, to have a DPO and a record of data processing activities. And then what you need to do fundamentally is to document the compliance with the Europrivacy criteria. The good news also with GDPR certification in general and with European data protection is that you can also focus on the priority data processing. You are certifying data processing activities. You're not certifying a whole company. You cannot do it under GDPR. You can only certify data processing activities. So the good news, you can really focus on your priority data processing. You can start with the most important one or the most exposed data processing, and then you can document, you can certify them, and you can progressively extend to other data processing. You can also decide just to document the compliance without certifying them. You have a high level of flexibility. You can really adapt your strategy to your needs. And that is something very important. It also enables to deliver certification which are far more reliable and trustable than certification that would certify a whole company as a whole, saying, oh, everything is complying with the data regulation, data protection regulation. In the context of GDPR certification, you have certification which is more detailed and complementary to a more transversal certification like ISO 27001 that Alan will describe later. And there are clear complementarities, but the certification under Europrivacy, under GDPR, is really a certification focused on a slice of your data processing activities in a company. You focus on it, you analyze it, you do a real audit, and then you deliver a certificate which is highly reliable because it's really addressing the specific requirements of your slice of data processing activities. So how does it work? Usually you start, as I mentioned, to document your compliance, which enables you already to reduce the risk for you. So you can even stop there because I don't want to have a certification, just want to document my compliance, to check my compliance and document it. Then you use the criteria. You can assess, document, and then have a clear documentation of your compliance, which means if at any time a supervisory authority has questions, wants to make an inspection or inquiry, you have already the documentation ready to address the different obligations of the GDPR. And you will be able, through the process, also to identify any potential gap and address them. Then the next stage is to request a certification. Then you contact different certification bodies. You can use the Europrivacy website to submit a request which is shared automatically with all certification bodies or all relevant solution provider or partners. And then you will receive different offers. You choose the best one for you according to your own criteria. And then that will enable you, again, as we mentioned before, to value your compliance, to be able to communicate your compliance, to communicate it to the data subjects, to your B2B partners, to the investors, to the different stakeholders. And then, of course, you need to maintain. It's not a window dressing exercise. It's really serious, but it's why it is so highly valuable, because you have a model and the EDPB required to have at least a yearly monitoring of the compliance. So you will have some surveillance audit, which are far lighter than the initial audit, like for ISO 27001. So it will be the same principle. You have a cycle of 3 years. Initial certification audit, followed by 2 yearly surveillance audit, and then you can conclude the cycle by a recertification, which is again lighter than the initial one. So it's very similar to ISO. And by the way, Europrivacy is fully aligned on ISO 17065, so it's fully aligned also with ISO requirements and ISO standards. It has been designed to maximize the interoperability and synergies with ISO 27001 and order management system certification. And then the idea is to make this process also enjoyable. So it's really to turn compliance as a source of stress, often for companies, to something positive, to something that you can really enjoy, you can make it pleasant, that you can make as simple to implement as possible. Of course, it requires some exercise, but the idea is to make the process as efficient as possible, and that's very important. So overall, you have a process, if you want a journey where you start by complying with the law, which is anyway something you have to do, which is where you have the largest effort to dedicate. And once you have complied with the law, you can stop there. But what is interesting with the criteria, you can use them already to check and document your compliance to reduce the risk. Not only to comply with the law, but to be able to demonstrate it in case of questions and to ensure that you didn't miss anything in the process. You didn't have a blind spot in your assessment or in your implementation. Then, once you have checked and documented your compliance, you certify and then you create value. And that's very interesting because it's not only about complying with the law, but turning this compliance into something valuable. And then you continue by making it enjoyable and to maintain it over the long run. Okay. Now, the whole process is supported by different resources. I will go quickly because I see that time is flying. We have different resources. We have a public website where you find a whole set of information. You can also access the public version of the criteria. You have then the online academy where you can be trained to either as a DPO to understand how Europrivacy works, or as an implementer, or as an auditor. So you have the whole training program, which is online with online exams. And then you have the Europrivacy Community and Resource website, which gathers all the relevant resources to be used by the DPO, the implementer, the auditors to ensure an adequate implementation of the criteria. We have also, and I will go very quickly through it, what we name a welcome pack. So if you work, for instance, with Alan's team, they will probably propose you to use this pack, which provides for the DPO of the clients of implementers a whole set of resources, which is made available for 3 years to support the process, again, to make the process as efficient and user-friendly as possible. Let me move to the next slide. So it's really about assessing, certifying, enjoying. I already mentioned it. It's really a process. We really see it as a process. And maybe a last element, so to mention that it's the European Center for Certification on Privacy, which is in charge of managing the scheme, is also working on quite a number of other EU regulations. We're currently working on the AI Act and European Health Data Space, the Data Act, and so on. The Europrivacy is progressively being extended with new extensions, regulatory extensions to assess compliance with other regulations. So you will know about it in the coming year, including at the Privacy Symposium in Venice. And I mention it because another role of ECCP is really to support international dialogue and cooperation in the domain of data regulation compliance. And that's an opportunity, if you're interested, to meet quite a number of stakeholders involved in data protection compliance, regulations, evolution. It's a conference where we have all the top European and non-European authorities, from the head of EDPB, EDPS, DG Justice, but we have ICO from UK, the head of the Canadian Data Protection Authority, Commissioner Dufresne, the US Department of Justice, Department of Commerce, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Japan, Singapore, and so on. And that's a good opportunity also to discuss the evolution of data regulation and compliance, because there will be a dedicated track on data protection certification and compliance. And I will stop there, and I thank you very much for your time and attention. And I know that Alan will explain you the complementarity between Europrivacy or GDPR certification with Europrivacy and ISO 27001, where you see there's a really nice integration of the two together. So Alan, the floor is yours. Thank you for your time.
Sebastian, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found that really interesting. Of course, if you're thinking about Venice in April, is there a better place to be? Venice in spring has to be one of the best places in the world, so I encourage you to think about that. But for this afternoon, we're going to concentrate on ISO 27001 and on Europrivacy. So, what are the criteria? Getting down to some of the kind of basic areas that you've got to address. There are, to get Europrivacy certification, a couple of things you've got to do. The first thing is to meet the Europrivacy core criteria, and that's basically to comply with GDPR. If there's one thing I love about Europrivacy as a standard, is it deals from a business point of view with the question of whether or not a supplier of yours or a data processor is in fact GDPR compliant. You don't have to take their word for it. You don't have to go and do a whole extensive set of audits to find out. You can simply say, show me your Europrivacy compliance certificate, because the starting point is the core criteria. Are you compliant with what GDPR says? And there are 3 other areas, and I'll come onto those, but as I said, the starting point is the core criteria. The core criteria are all of the things that you already know and love from the detailed articles of the GDPR. So each of the elements that you have to comply with are there because GDPR says you have to comply with. And as Sebastian said, what we're talking about is effectively translating legal requirements into a privacy standard, and that's exactly what this set of requirements here, the criteria there, talk about. So number one, that's the first thing that you do. And if you're drawing on consultancy support, you don't need to. Your consultant will help you work your way through that, or alternatively will check that you've done it correctly. The second area is what in Europrivacy is called the complementary checks and controls, and that's contextual. So it's the controls. Remember, controls are a mitigation for risk. These are the controls which are specific to technologies and applications. It's obvious that how you apply GDPR will vary depending on what business you're in. If you're if you're operating on a blockchain platform or you're using particular internet applications, there will be specific controls that need to be in place for personal data to be protected. And so the complementary checks and controls is the second area of controls that you need to work through, dependent on the scope of your compliance and how you go about building that compliance. The third area are what we call the technical and organizational measures, TOM checks and controls. And technical organizational measures and controls are, broadly speaking, what ISO 27001 talks about and what Europrivacy allows you to do for all processing other than high-risk data processing, allows you not to go through the business of complying with what is set out in the TOM checks and controls, but simply to register your ISO 27001 compliance certificate, ISO 27001 being the logical way to demonstrate that you have an effective mechanism in place for assuring information security. So how to go about building Europrivacy compliance, you're basically going to go through those steps, and once you're ready, you're going to go for compliance. ISO 27001 is a major contributor to getting yourself ready. And I just want to touch on a couple of areas that are worthwhile thinking about. So first of all, ISO 27001, and it's the 2022 version you should be looking at, is an information security management system. As I just said, it delivers on the TOM checks and controls, but you can also add to the scope of a 27001 assessment ISO 27701, which is a specific personal information management system standard. It's designed to be integrated into 27001. It can help broaden out and help with the implementation of your Europrivacy compliance framework, so it can be part of the program. And those standards give you much broader even than Europrivacy certification. It enables you to meet the broad range of requirements that more and more of your customers tend to want to have. But those standards can go a lot further. So yes, at the one level they deliver, and as this slide shows, and when you get the slides you can dig into those, it delivers a number of the specific areas that Europrivacy standard has requirements around. It has requirements around data processing agreements, for instances. ISO 27001 has a set of controls around supplier relationships. So there is a cross-mapping from 27001 to the detailed requirements of Europrivacy, which not only help you with the implementation, but as I said, they can go further. They can, if you already have ISO 27001, they can support the implementation of Europrivacy. 27001, the risk assessment and management processes are designed to help you identify and mitigate legal and financial risks related to information security across a broad range of areas. Article 32 of GDPR says that's exactly what you should be doing. Your ISO 27001 certification can validate and demonstrate a structured approach to GDPR compliance, which is exactly what you should be doing. You can leverage ISO 27001 to bolster your organization's reputation for information security. You can build trust among data subjects. You can even through using the data flow mapping tool. For instance, ISO 27001 requires the mapping of data, demonstrate compliance with GDPR Article 30. Applying security controls to streamlining cross-border data transfers enables you to demonstrate adherence to GDPR's data transfer mechanisms in Articles 44 through 50. So simply taking your existing ISO 27001 management system and looking at how that maps to Europrivacy can take you a huge part of the distance to Europrivacy certification. And of course, you can go a bit further. ISO 27001 and the controls in Annex A map to what we call a cyber defense in depth model. The confidentiality, integrity, and availability cornerstones of ISO 27001 are also the cornerstones of Europrivacy. It is about the confidentiality of personal data, the integrity of personal data, and the availability to those who need to have it, as well as to the data subjects themselves of personal data, that it's the heart of GDPR. And do bear in mind that privacy risks, risks to the protection, risks to the security of personal data are also cyber risks. So they are simply different sides of the same coin. So you can leverage ISO 27001 for Europrivacy compliance. You can also leverage the CyberComply platform for that. CyberComply is a platform which is designed to deliver a comprehensive range of standards and frameworks in a way that is integrated on the platform, enables you to access functionality and documentation, which enables you to build a complex program in a simple and straightforward, time-consuming, cost-effective manner, enables you to leverage a broad range of additional services, and more than that, enables you to demonstrate cost effectively that you are meeting the requirements of the Europrivacy standard. You can even have the audit carried out on the CyberComply platform. So the combination of Europrivacy requirements enabling you to demonstrate that you meet the requirements of GDPR, ISO 27001 support, and putting that all on CyberComply as a platform is an incredibly good way to build an integrated, effective management system. Just a brief plug, there is a special price offer for CyberComply which expires at the end of March, so do go on to the IT governance website and have a look at that. Do have a look at what current customers of CyberComply have had to say about it as a product, and look at some of the customers who are using it. As we say, don't risk it, don't risk personal data. CyberComply is the logical way to go forward. And I'm going to finish off briefly by just pointing at a couple of resources which are available to everybody who is tackling Europrivacy. The first European Data Protection Seal, recently published from IT Governance, is a book which can help you tackle that. There is a range of services, so not only is there CyberComply, but there's implementation consultancy, there's help around GDPR, there's a readiness assessment service for Europrivacy as a standard, and of course there's penetration tests, and penetration tests are one of the many sensible requirements of Europrivacy as a standard. So IT governance, if you go on to the IT governance website, you can access all of those services, you can find out more about them, or indeed you can pick them up by following through on the slides. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the point at which I'm going to stop talking to you and take questions. Just a reminder, there is a Q&A panel. All you have to do is go into it. You can type the questions you've got into the panel, and what I'll do is I will pick out the questions that you've typed and share them with the audience, and then if I can, we'll answer those questions. So the first question is well, it's not a question, it's a statement. I agree with it. The compliance extension to non-EU jurisdictions is very useful. I agree with that. It means that you can demonstrate compliance not only to EU GDPR, but also UK GDPR, to the Swiss Data Protection Act, and so on. And as Europrivacy broadens the range of organizations who are signed up for that, so it gets easier for you to deal with that. The company, Sebastian, was that?
No, absolutely. I think really the concern we had, and it's a very important element. We think that compliance with the regulation should really be the reality and the norm. And the idea is to make it easy, user-friendly, efficient. And we know that for companies, in particular for SMEs, if they have to repeat certifications in different jurisdictions, like for instance, Canada just adopted the new federal law in Canada which also refers to certification of compliance with the regulation, with the Canadian regulations. And if you have to replicate every time the same exercise, while the regulations are very similar, makes not much sense. And the idea was really to reflect and to think, how can we improve things? How can we improve the experience for the DPOs? And we're knowing that the easier the process will be, the more company will be complying with the regulation, the better data subjects will be protected. So there's a virtuous circle.
Great, thank you. A company may not have a DPO as they're not needed in all circumstances. If the company does not have a DPO, is that a blocker to get the EP certification? It is at the moment. One of the requirements is the DPO identifies that to the company that you are complying with GDPR as part of the initial criteria. But Sebastian, perhaps you have comments on whether there is likely to be any evolution to the point where non-DPO organizations can get EP certification.
So within we have a certain flexibility, but we need to have someone, whether it is a DPO or it has a title of DPO, we need to have someone in charge of the compliance. Again, we don't, and we had long conversation with the board of experts as well to discuss it, and we thought, no, that's a minimum requirement. So a little bit like the UK GDPR, which is moving away with a strict definition of DPOs, but you still have someone in charge of ensuring this role of monitoring and providing support for the compliance with the regulation. So we need to have someone in charge. Otherwise, no, it's not doable. So it means that, of course, for some small SMEs which would decide not to invest in human resources or external services to ensure compliance, then they will not be in a position to complete the certification. That's a requirement that we decided as a minimum baseline.
Okay, thank you very much. And there's no restriction on appointing a DPO. You don't have to have a DPO in order to appoint one. You can choose to have one. You can choose to appoint somebody to the role of being responsible for data protection.
Absolutely. No. You need to have someone who is in charge of compliance. It can be someone external, so it can be an external DPO or compliance service, but you need to have someone in charge of compliance for the entity which wants to be certified. And then part of the criteria we will assess if this person the qualified expertise and independence to do this work of ensuring. So we have some criteria to ensure that, again, the DPO has the possibility to report directly to the head of the organization, that it has a certain level of autonomy, and that it has an adequate level of expertise and knowledge to be able to assume this function.
Thank you. And for those of you who want to know more, do go on to the IT Governance or GRCI Law website. There is an independent DPO service available, which might help you think about what you want to do. Where can I access the public available criteria for Europrivacy? Are there any free resources available? I think the simple answer is go to the Europrivacy website.
So absolutely. So on the Europrivacy website, you can access already quite clear description information. You can access also to a read-only version of the criteria. So you cannot print them, but you can see, you can consult the criteria. And then if you go on the community website, we decided to centralize all the resources in the Europrivacy community and resource website. So there's a subscription fee, but then you have, through a single subscription, access to all the documentation, templates, criteria, guidelines, handbooks, and it's really reasonable as a price. And this revenue enables us to maintain and further develop the scheme. It's not greedy at all. It's really about making the development of the scheme sustainable, to support upcoming translations in other official languages. So it's a way also to support this effort. Again, it came from the research. It's really here to support the community, to make it available to those interested in ensuring compliance, to support the professionals and practitioners. And we really try to make it as accessible and affordable to anyone. But at the same time, having a model which enables to further develop it and to make it sustainable.
Yeah, it's a cracking good resource, folks, so do go and check it out. Is the appointment of a DPO mandatory for ISO 27001 certification too? No, it's not. ISO 27001 is focused on information security. You do not need a DPO to do that. If you're putting the ISO 27701 extension into your 27001 scope, and if there is a legal requirement for you to have a DPO, in other words, high risk, high volume processing, for instance, then yes, you would need to have a DPO, but it's not an ISO 27001 requirement, is the simple answer to that. How long does it take to implement Europrivacy in an organization? And I'm sure Sebastian will have an answer. Mine is it kind of depends on how mature your GDPR compliance activity is and how mature your information security activity is. But Sebastian, would you like to have a go at that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's another factor because there are two ways. You can do it yourself and then you take the criteria and you document, or you can request the support of qualified partners. And then you can save a lot of time. You can delegate this work to a qualified partner. Like, again, I'm sure that Alan's team would be ready to okay, let me just share my webcam. Yeah, so there is another element is whether or not you use tools to support it. So we have official partners like OneTrust, ACP, Smart Global Governance, and which are developing solutions with the Europrivacy criteria integrated into it. And so you can use tools that will facilitate the process. But fundamentally, it's about documenting the compliance with the regulation. So if you've done what you are expected to do, or you are expected to do to comply with the regulation, in principle, it can be very fast. Now, what may happen that during the journey, you will identify maybe some blind spots, things that you didn't think about it. And then you need, of course, to do some adaptations. But I converge and concur with Alan's comment. It depends a lot on the level of maturity. If you're mature, it can be very fast. What I can tell you that an audit itself, an audit process for data control for the first audit, it's usually about 5 days of man audit, including the reporting, the preparation. So it's quite reasonable for the first one. And then for the subsequent certification for a controller, again, if you're certified in a second target of evaluation, it's about 3 months there. So it's really made, it has been designed to be very, very efficient, to really simplify, optimize the process in terms of efficiency, meaning both increasing the level of reliability, reducing the risk of subjective interpretation or diverging interpretation, at the same time optimizing the time required to assess the level of compliance, but with a higher level of reliability. So it's really the definition of ISO of efficiency that we followed to drive the development of Europrivacy.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Does the Europrivacy Seal certification cover privacy harms and threats and core privacy risks and compliance? Is there content for that? That's the question, Sebastian. How do you?
Could you repeat the specific elements?
Sure. Does Europrivacy certification cover privacy harms and threats and core privacy risks and compliance?
So definitely the risk for the data subjects are clearly addressed in the context of the criteria, but again, we follow clearly the regulation. So typically regulation and the soft law, the EDPB guidelines. So to give you an example, for instance, for international data transfer, where you are transferring data to third countries, we really translated or tried to address the requirement as agreed by consensus among the European authorities and what are the elements to be taken into account regarding governmental access in third countries, effective redress mechanisms. So we really try to address these different elements and to cover them all through the criteria, so to have a systematic evaluation. So clearly, yes. the risk and the threats to the risk and freedom of the data subject is a very important element, part of the scheme. It's part of the DNA of the scheme, yes.
Great. And then the final question, Europrivacy community subscription is on a yearly basis only, not monthly. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, because the way we do it, if you take an ISO standard, for instance, usually you will purchase a standard once for forever, and you do it, and you, but then if you want to have another standard, if you want, for instance, to have 2701, you need to purchase it. If you want to have 27701, you need to do another purchase. If you want to use then 17030 for the mark of conformity, you will need to purchase it. What we decided is to say, now let's provide a platform where we provide all the information, all the documentation through a flat subscription. So there's no additional fee. You can access all the documentation. And of course, if we would reduce it to 1 month to give access to, we have about 750 documents and resources made available. So some are coming from authorities, so external, but we have all the criteria, the scheme, all the documentation. So that would not be reasonable. I mean, we try to find a good balance, but we need to make it fair also. But the other advantage and the reason why we decided also to adopt a subscription model is that we regularly update the documentation. So we really ensure that there's a continuous improvement, and if there's any change in the legal framework, we translate it into the criteria and the elements. So you really have a up-to-date information, continuously up-to-date information, and that's the idea. Plus, you will find quite a number of resources. Like, for instance, if you want to address national obligations, we have for each country, we try to have a systematic profile and summary of the different specific obligation of each and every jurisdiction. So it's a lot of work which is brought to the community.
Yeah, very valuable work indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that brings us to the end of Q&A. I just want to thank Sebastian for being with us this morning. He's on the other side of the world right now, so it's afternoon in Europe, it's morning in the Americas. Sebastian, thank you very much for your time. It's been very valuable. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. I hope that you found the information useful and valuable, and above all, I hope you decide to get started on Europrivacy certification or in February, not even in March.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure, and wish to see you soon again. And potentially in Venice, I forgot the date, there was a mistake. It's June 10 to 14. There was a typo.
June 10,
it's June
not
10
April.
No, not April, June 10 to 14. April
okay.
was last year. So there was a typo on the slide. So
Gotcha.
June
okay.
10 to 14.
June, folks, June. Get in your diary,
All the
June
best.
in Venice.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.